Focus on the long term, maybe like the stock market, right? Just play the long game and keep investing in it over time. There will be many setbacks, there will be many disappointments, things will happen that you may or may not be happy with. And there's been many shocks to the system as well. We always seem to measure ourselves against more mature markets like the US or Europe or things like that. They have highly imperfect systems as well. And there have been many, many instances where they have also been under regulatory capture by incumbents. Every entrepreneur goes through many challenges. And I think that's what those scars are what define you. Paytm is going through some challenging times right now.
What would you do differently with this whole AI, what should I say, backdrop?
We're going to have to reinvent ourselves.
Good evening. Welcome to yet another edition of Thinkly Talks. Today, our guest is Kunal Bajaj. Kunal is an authority in the telecom, internet technology space with an experience of over 2 decades. He started off his career with McKinsey out of the New York office, and post that, he has been in various consulting advisory roles to enterprises and regulatory bodies like TRAI. But mostly, he has dabbled in and with startups. He joined one post McKinsey, started 2 more after that, and he's been a mentor consultant and an independent board director to many well-known ones such as Paytm and Healthify.me. He's currently the co-founder and CEO of CloudXtel, India's first full-stack network as a service provider. Kunal's educational qualifications includes 3 degrees from UPenn, with a bachelor's in computer sciences, master's in telecom and networking, and a bachelor's in management and finance from the Wharton School. So with that, a very warm welcome to you, Kunal. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Vivek. It's great to join you guys. My first time on this show, but hopefully looking forward to the start of a great relationship together.
Likewise. And I think we have much to unpack out here, when we really look at your profile and, all that you've done. But I think a good starting point, Kunal, would be for you to just kind of walk us through, what your journey has been and how did you land up doing what you are doing right now.
Yeah, so I don't want to necessarily rewind too far, but I did grow up in the US. So from that perspective, maybe it's been a slight reversal because I've been in India now for just about to hit 21 years in 2 months' time now. And I prior to coming here, 21 years ago to work, I had never actually worked or studied in India. Did one McKinsey project while I was associated with the McKinsey New York office. But other than that, there was never there on my roadmap. It came for 6 months. And, like I said, it's been almost 21 years now. But in terms of what got me started in telecom and internet, and I think a lot of people ask me, I'm class of 1999 from university and 2000 from my master's. And a lot of people ask, okay, back then when you decided, why did you want to do a master's in telecom? Ever since then, my entire career has really been around the business of technology associated with telecom and the internet. And it was because I think as I was doing computer science and the internet was starting to become really widespread, the first time I went on an internet browser was probably, when I was in 11th grade. I got my first email ID when I was in 12th grade. And, it was just odd when I went from the environment of my high school to the University of Pennsylvania, right, where you already had such a massive ecosystem and a very robust internet environment running. So it fascinated me to really get into the innards of how the internet works. And the best way to understand the internet was really to understand telecom. And then that's kind of where the idea around studying telecom a little bit more deeply actually came. And then my interest in that space, and I guess continued fascination with how it works and how it grows, and curiosity on what are the opportunities to grow it, basically just took off from there. Because whether it was at McKinsey or whether it was the startup that I was CTO at afterwards, my role was always, revolving around trying to understand the business aspects, the growth aspects, the opportunities around the interconnection between internet and telecom. So that's really how things began. And I've been fortunate to have a series of some very interesting experiences and some great growth opportunities to be able to continue to do today what I was interested in 30 years ago almost.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at where we are at right now, I think internet just had such a humble beginnings, right? I mean, the bandwidth, the infrastructure, the apps, right? I mean, it just seems unbelievable that we've seen all of this happening in our lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. My first way getting onto the internet was a 9600 baud dial-up modem. I still remember what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think we all
And
do.
yeah, and even even in university, in my freshman year dorm room, we still had to use dial-up, though it was 14.4. Finally, in my sophomore year dorm room, I could get onto a wired LAN connection, and then there was no looking back, because that's when the days of all those early use cases just started to flourish, right? And whether it was from file sharing to accessing streaming music to a lot of the free apps that one would be able to download onto your machine, right? There's just like free screensavers and things like that. Those were very, very early days usage. Until when I moved to India, and like I said, it was sort of 2003, late September, early October, from actually having been, on broadband for many years by that point in time. When I arrived in Delhi, the concept of getting broadband into your home was still fairly foreign, right? And even if you could get broadband, by and large, it was primarily some of the more forward-looking LCOs that were providing it over essentially just the Cat5 Ethernet
Right.
being dragged into your home from their
Home.
nearest switch, right? And those switches are hanging from trees and things like that. So it wasn't really broadband, right? It was barely just better than dial-up.
Right.
And I just like 1 or 2 months into my time of being at TRAI, I had made a presentation for the chairman TRAI at that time, who was Pradeep Bajaj, and I get a call saying, "Hey, can you please email this presentation?" And at home at that point in time, I still only had a dial-up connection. It literally took me more than 6 hours of connecting, reconnecting, disconnecting, retrying, just to get one PowerPoint presentation out in an email. So as a country, we've come a really, really long way, and I'm very proud to see how much it's advanced, because again, in 2003, the internet was still, and particularly broadband, was still quite a foreign subject. And while working in the government, I had met so many people who still questioned whether we as a country even needed it, right? And what was the requirement for us to have the kind of access to apps, services, and what they considered luxuries at that point in time that the internet was able to deliver.
No, I think we need to have come a long way. I mean, from those days to now, India, I think I read somewhere that we probably have the fifth or the sixth fastest, broadband connection in the world, and it doesn't matter even if it's the top 10. I mean, the fact that we are right there, and it's probably the cheapest, in terms of that, right? So it's really fascinating. So I would love to touch upon that when we kind of dwell down this whole regulatory aspect in a bit. But there are two very big contrarian moves that you did, right? One is, of course, you moved from consulting, not to a corporate enterprise, not a corp development role, but you basically moved to a startup, right? And the second thing, of course, your whole idea of being long on India and moving back to India, just about when the brain drain has started reversing, right? So could you just kind of walk us through those decisions? I'm sure it must have not been easy, right?
Yeah, look, I would like to say that I had this crystal ball and I was just, all seeing, all doing at the time, but obviously that never happens. And I think in anybody's journey in their career, right, a lot of it does happen to be right place, right time. And the point is, do you make that right place, right time possible for yourself, right? I mean, are you actually positioning yourself with the right options and opportunities to make that luck really happen? And so for me, consulting really was a very clear choice, because my first internship, while I was still at Penn, was in the finance sector. And that summer, I decided that, okay, I don't like stock trading and investment banking. I actually more fundamentally want to understand how businesses are built and run. And going into the finance stream, which I would say probably more than 70% of my peers both in the engineering and the Wharton side probably went more towards the investment banking, stock trading, algo trading, and corporate finance side of things. And fewer of us probably went towards the consulting side. But for me, going to consulting was to basically fundamentally understand how businesses are built and run. And then the attraction of entrepreneurship, I think, developed a little bit more, because in my final year of undergrad and then in my master's is when the dot-com boom really started to happen. Right. And it was something that I just really loved. So on campus itself, I had coded up. I mean, I can't take credit for it, but I had coded up a little platform that was essentially for me and all of my friends and all of my group projects across all the classes, we had our own Dropbox, right? And this is
Oh,
like, 1999, 2000, very simple. You can't call it Dropbox, but like that. And like I mentioned, and while it was, illegal at that time, but we didn't have, Spotify or equivalents, but yeah, music streaming, getting access to all of that stuff, sharing it amongst your friends. So it
mhm.
was something that, I was tried to always be a little bit ahead of the curve. I was the first amongst all my friends to get a mobile phone. So that was another area, right, where it was just me expressing my own interest.
Mhm,
And the dot-com boom sort of came at the right time, and really caught my interest. And so the whole objective of going to McKinsey was basically spend 2 years,
mhm.
deeply understand how to ask the right questions, how to communicate, how to synthesize, and how to fundamentally understand what makes a good business. And then see if I could, translate that or parlay that into an entrepreneurial experience. I didn't plan on starting something of my own. I think I was probably a little bit too risk averse at that point in time to sort of take that jump. Though, there were various conversations with good friends from college, from McKinsey itself, and things like that, where we said, okay, this is a great idea. But I think I wanted to at least try it in the construct or the context of an existing startup. And so when I joined Venue, it was an early stage startup, and while I didn't join as the CTO, but within 6 months of being there, they sort of made me the CTO. And I was part of the early team, and we grew very, very rapidly. And I would say it was, again, sort of, right place, right time, because like you said, it was definitely a risk. I took a pay cut, and I've done that several times in my career where you sort of go out on a limb and say, you know what, this is something I really want to do. This is an experience I want to have. If it works out, great. There's a tremendous amount of upside. If it doesn't work out, then you know what, at least I've learned something. So yeah, I took a significant pay cut from my McKinsey salary to get to NU, and the time there was extremely rewarding. And it allowed me to again understand very closely how you build up an early stage company through a very high phase of growth, but also
Right.
from the technology side, how to really just build and execute and ship very, very cool technology.
That's some great advice coming from you. We'll try and touch upon the career part, but I think this whole thing about being willing to take a pay cut so that you can follow and you look at the long-term goal that you want to achieve is probably one of the most fascinating nugget out there. But what about India? I mean, India would have been a
Yeah.
big deal, right? Right from New York, that too. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. So look, I was evaluating, so when you was going well, we grew very rapidly. There were, so on the horizon, one could see potential for an exit, and started thinking about basically, okay, what should I do next? So one of the options was, hey, I could go get an MBA, right? But I felt like between Morton and my telecom masters in McKinsey, I'd probably studied enough. The other option was, okay, well, if I get an exit and this executes the way that we want it, then for 6 months I can really do whatever I want, not worry about, having a salary, having a job. And the whole idea was, okay, I'll do something else for 6 months. And it's very interesting because everyone thinks about McKinsey as extremely corporate oriented, or what's the right word I'm looking for? Very enterprise driven, right? With no social inclination at all. And what's very interesting is my class in McKinsey, New York, more than half of especially my closest friends, probably three-fourths of my closest friends in the class, post McKinsey actually went to different social enterprises and
wow.
spent 1 or 2 years after their McKinsey experience there. And I obviously came out of Wharton with a complete capitalist mindset, right? Never thinking about, okay, nonprofit, helping countries, helping organizations. But being amongst that group of friends really was able to mold my thinking in such a way that I was like, you know what? If I get this exit, and I don't need to work for 6 months or even longer, then it would be a great opportunity in my life at that time to try and give back to society by going to India, using my experience in telecom and internet, and saying, can I actually contribute to the building of telecom and internet on a completely pro bono basis, just basically because I can. And I felt like the combination of big picture experience from McKinsey and very specific micro experience of scaling a startup in that space
Mhm.
would really come in handy. And the question was whether anyone would value that and whether anyone would actually take me seriously, and if I could find the right opportunity to do that in India. And
Right.
that was sort of the key, which was finding the right place and the right opportunity to contribute. But basically, by the summer of 2003, I'd kind of made up my mind that, okay, you know what, the MBA thing doesn't make sense because that's just, it's probably not going to add as much value as going out and doing this completely different, unique, sort of like out of the blue kind of opportunity. And again, going back to thinking about luck, right? I didn't know much about the Indian telecom sector at the time. So no one, it wasn't like I knew in 2003 the mobile revolution was just beginning to happen and
Right.
things were actually starting to change, and that, and TRAI at that time was extremely, extremely forward looking and becoming extremely powerful and putting in place a lot of very groundbreaking policies and working in partnership with DOT. That time was really when telecom in India really got set up for the masses. So again, it was kind of just right place, right time, and also the right set of mentors. Pradeep Bajaj as chairman, Dr. DPS It as member telecom. They were just amazingly independent thinkers who were very technically and economically aligned towards growth prospects of the industry.
No, great stuff. And, I think I would love to touch upon TRAI in a bit, but I think before we go down that path, tell us about your third venture, I believe, right? Cloud Excel would be your third one?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes,
So tell us
absolutely.
about that and, really in the space that you're playing, who's your competition, and just walk us through that stuff.
Sure, absolutely. So, look, when we started this organization a little bit about 10 years ago or so, right? This was before 4G had actually been launched, but it was very clear that the data revolution was coming to India. And it was also quite clear by that point in time, particularly because I had already spent more than 10 years working on telecom policy and consulting and everything else in the Indian telecom and internet space. It was also very clear that that revolution was going to happen on wireless networks, and it was not going to come via a wireline network. So the idea was, look, the world over, from, in the 5 or 6 years prior to that, when we looked at how the internet had progressed or enterprise IT had progressed, from everyone owning their own servers in their own data centers, every enterprise and every new internet company and every app developer had essentially said, we're going to move everything to public clouds or private clouds. And enterprises over time had started moving from private to public clouds as well. But in telecom, and I was fortunate enough to be part of the first batch of independent tower sharing companies that was set up in India as well. So my second startup, which was a consulting company, our first project was actually to help a private equity fund out of the US to set up India's first independent tower sharing company. And so the same opportunity that we saw at that point in time in the 2007 timeframe, I felt that beyond that, there is now new opportunities for sharing in telecom, because tower sharing was the furthest in the spectrum that telecom infrastructure sharing had actually gone. Rest of the world had moved to the cloud. So I was like, why don't we apply the principles of the cloud, which is that, look, you need specialists in particular domains where you're going to have huge amounts of demand and capacity. You need to be able to offer elements of sharing to be able to reduce costs, and you need to be able to take non-traditional ways of models of doing business and bring those to the telecom environment. And that's why we started Cloud Excel, basically to say that if we're going to have data explosion, tower sharing on macro sites is not going to be enough. We need to look at fiber. We need to look at last mile access through small cells. We need to look at fiber connectivity to homes, to enterprises, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't, again, say that I was prescient enough to say that, we knew exactly all these things that were going to happen. But the principles that guided us then and still guide us today are, first, identify the points of the telco network and the ISP network, and now, hyperscalers and content providers, where the network is at its highest points of stress. And generally that tends to be in the last mile or in the access layer, right? How do you actually connect to you and me and to that last customer? How is the Zoom call running? How do our mobile phones actually connect to the telecom network? The second is where self-deployment economics for telcos or ISPs is not going to work out. You want a specialist there who's going to be able to do sharing of that infrastructure. And third is where your traditional solutions of, okay, put up one more macro site or put up a macro station, or just, go rely on traditional forms of fiber deployment, things like that, it's not going to work. So where these three things intersect is where we wanted to play. And so, I had the privilege of partnering with the family that owned Bombay Gas, and so they were huge supporters. We came together. They were able to provide access to the erstwhile Bombay Gas infrastructure for us to start our fiber deployment in South Mumbai. They were also the ones who supported us through their balance sheet, funding us for the first 8 years of the journey of this organization, as we move from being a South Bombay fiber player to then moving into providing small cells to last mile fiber connectivity to FTTH, and having a national footprint. So that same philosophy still drives us today. Figure out where the problems are and go figure out innovative solutions to solve them. and own that. So plan that infrastructure, own the infrastructure, provide the operations and maintenance on top of it, and provide it on a services model or a leasing model to telcos, ISPs, content providers who need to use that over long periods of lease cycles.
Fascinating, and there are a couple of questions here from in the community. I mean, Advait is asking that I would like to know what has been the most rewarding aspect of your role as CEO and co-founder of CloudXtel, and just kind of linking with another question from Varun. Can you just share an example of a major decision that you made that significantly impacted, the journey or the pivot that CloudXtel took?
Sure. So let me try and address them both. I'll go with the first. I would say the most rewarding aspect actually is for me it's the team and the people. I think we've built up an exemplary leadership team, and their one downs and their one downs, and I think we focused very carefully over the first 4 or 5 years in ensuring that particularly when we were small, when we were Bombay only operations, and you could kind of see everyone and know everyone's name. Culture from that point itself was extremely important, and we ensured that whatever we did as we brought new people in, that we tried to induct them into the culture. And then COVID hit, and everyone became remote, and we hired lots of people even during COVID, but people that we've never seen or people we never met. And we also started to expand our national footprint at that point in time, and it became more difficult to manage that culture, and we definitely went through a decline in that. But now, as we've come out of COVID, and it's been a few years now, our focus has again been on team, on people. We talk about our roadmap at CloudXtel, especially after we've raised private equity funding a year ago, is to basically 10x. It's 10x everything. But I think the fundamental underlying principle of that is, we can only 10x, and the company can only do what our people do. So for me, that's the most rewarding, as well as the aspect that we would like to focus most on. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of people would probably talk about customers or product or things like that. I think all of that will come, right? You will serve customers very, very well if your team is unified, and if your team is happy, and if they're following the same culture. As a leadership team, we want to do that. So that is the most rewarding part for me. And the second piece, I think, is the most significant decision is, when we finally decided to go out on a limb and say, while we started out as a pure fiber player in Bombay, and it's not easy to be digging up roads and putting in underground fiber in South Mumbai. It's the most expensive fiber right-of-way charges in the world, not just in India. So it's very difficult, and a very high level of investment that goes into that. But then to sort of say, what, we do have the conviction that we need to, while we've started here and we've established our credibility now, and we've been doing it for about 3 years and establishing our credibility with customers like Airtel, Vodafone, Idea, Tata, et cetera, that it was the right, to continue to seek out opportunities to move up the value chain, i.e. move into the wireless sector, right? And so we did some experiments. Technically, one of those experiments was very successful, commercially a complete failure. But that experiment set us up to start our small cells hosting business. And we became India's first turnkey small cells host and small cells provider. And that is the business that really allowed us to go from being a Bombay provider to being present now in 450 towns and cities across the country. Because that was a lower asset investment per unit. And it also allowed us to be geographically diverse and build that team and get into a model where we became a lot more strategically important to telcos. And, till date, we're the second largest small cell host in the country. We're the largest independent, because Indus is the largest today. And you had asked earlier about competition. So yes, in the small cell space, we do compete with the likes of Indus and Summit. It was a Brookfield company, and American Towers. And in the fiber space, there's fewer competitors. It's less organized. And I think that's, and it sort of goes all the way back to where we started at TRAI and everything else, which is the opportunity for fiber deployment and fiber growth in India still remains a massive market that over the next 5 to 6 years will need to continue to be tapped even more significantly than what's been done today.
So what I hear you say is that really the two key things for you that has kind of driven you is really the culture, and then being strategically indispensable to your clients. I mean, that's really been,
Yes.
Been responsible to kind of, grow this company.
Absolutely.
So great stuff. So Kunal, the interesting thing here is that, whenever I look at Venue and, of course, what you're doing with CloudXtel and some of your other ventures, you somehow seem to be, I must say, almost enjoying and relishing the idea of being in a place where the space is heavily regulated, which is hugely capital intensive. You've got some big giants and incumbents sitting,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and I would imagine this would be contrary to the kind of advice you would have given as a McKinsey consultant to your clients, right? I mean, look for the white space, look for the blue ocean, right? And
Yeah.
so, why, I mean, how do you really thrive in this? I mean, any particular reason why you like these kind of capital intensive, asset heavy businesses in that sense?
Yeah. So, and it kind of goes back to the first startup I tried to do after TRI, which was to try and launch India's first wireless ISP. Right. Again, well, too far ahead of its time at that point in time, but yeah, hugely capital intensive, heavily regulated. I guess it's just because, part of what I believe in is that, and this is what kept me at TRAI for 2 years rather than just the 6 months that I originally signed up for, is because I still believe it is hugely important for the future of this country that we are fully digitized and that we have the best connectivity to networks, to the internet, to broadband, whatever you want to say. And today we call it the internet broadband. Tomorrow, who knows what it'll finally develop into. But there is a fundamental belief that I have that everything that we're going to do in the future is going to be running on a series of interconnected networks, right? And you can call it the internet, or and whether it's Web 2.0, 3.0, or the AI web in the future, or whatever it may become. And for that, somehow I continue to see opportunities where, as a country, we're not quite there yet. And there's still a lot more that we need to do at that infrastructural level to really be the underlying layer that's going to drive so much of the other growth, right? We've seen startups grow and flourish and actually now become, the second best startup nation in the world, right? From being nowhere on that ranking. And a lot of that is, I think, credit to the fact that the mobile industry has gone out and done things in India that no mobile industry anywhere else in the world has done. So that underlying connectivity layer for me is still, I think, quite important. But I don't believe we've reached our destination yet.
But when you look at these kind of startups, and I think it'll be a good case, because I think typically the ones that we read a lot about, or where, let's say, people who are not in the startup space, and the youngsters that are coming into the workforce, they read about these heavy funding, typically platform companies. They hear about these product tech startups, right? And usually the big news is when there's a large round of funding, right? In your case, you would have probably taken a very different path in kind of building out your business. I mean, so could you just kind of walk us through as to how building, a business like, let's say, Cloud Extel would have been different from, let's say, the other companies that we kind of hear about?
Yeah, so I would say maybe one of the hazards of just my mindset is to build with a strong foundation from day one. Right. In the sense that, and what that means is sometimes you end up going a lot slower than what the headlines would suggest, right? Everyone talks about these overnight success stories and, how many days to becoming a unicorn and things like that. I unfortunately do not ascribe to that kind of model, because I think in order to really build a strong foundation that can stand the test of time, it takes time. And if you don't have strong fundamental unit economics around whatever you do, then your foundation itself, no matter how great a technology you may be building or everything else, will eventually crumble. You may exit, you may hand it over to someone else, but then it'll crumble in their hands. And I think so that's why from day one, we have been focused on whatever we build, we have to have very clear foresight towards profitability. And so as an organization, we've now been EBITDA positive for several years now, which again, you don't hear in the startup world, though we're CapEx heavy. But if you actually look at our cash flows, if we stop growing tomorrow, we would be profitable, cash flow positive, and self-funding. And it's really now about, investing in that growth, which is what we're trying to do and how we're trying to essentially build the organization. But that wouldn't have been possible if our focus wasn't like that from day one. And certainly I have, our partners from Bombay Gas and the Jalan family to also thank for that kind of, thinking and mutual alignment of prospects as well, right? They had the wherewithal and the strength and the belief to continue to invest in building this capex heavy business out until we were finally able to raise external private equity capital. But at the same time, we also had a shared view and a shared culture of ensuring that we were building a profitable business. And likewise in my prior startups as well, and so many of the other startups which I will mentor and advise, we always work from the fundamental business model and the fundamental unit economics first, and then look at how do you scale on the back of that. Like I said, it may be a hazard because everyone likes the overnight success stories, and those are the things that grab the headlines. But I think these are the institutions that survive longer, right? And if you look in telecom in just our 10 years of existence, we've survived, massive consolidation in the space,
Right.
Supreme Court AGR ruling, the merger of Vodafone and Idea. I mean, even initially, sort of the first launch of Geo, where that created in itself tremendous disruption in the environment and the growth of 4G. So we've been through many of these capex cycles and many disruptions, and I think with each of these, we're coming out stronger because we're sticking to what we believe in, which is not only those concepts that drive where we do business, but also we're ensuring that every business that we do is fundamentally strong on its own.
Great stuff. And just picking up on this question of Aniket Rao, talking about TRAI. I mean, could you just kind of walk us through? I mean, like, I've worked closely with the RBI, during my time of running a tech startup in payments, but typically, and I would say that, I mean, it's filled with some very bright, forward-looking people, so they kind of came in 2009 to kind of regulate the payment space, which wasn't there. So they came in like this, and then they opened up, right? And I think you know, in your experience of being on the board of Paytm, would have probably got some insights as to what was really happening, in the whole dealing with RBI, and then you work closely with TRAI, right? Just walk us through your whole experience of working with these regulatory authorities, especially on the TRAI side. I mean, how do they look at the environment, and how is it different? I mean, how is the worldview different from, let's say, an entrepreneur or an enterprise looking at the space?
Yeah, look, I think so. The time that I was at TRAI was, I would say, really the golden age of the revolution in telecom. Interestingly, in 2004 and 2005, TRAI also won regulator of the regulator of the year and globally and for all telecom regulators. So they were doing some fantastic work. I'd like to say we were doing some fantastic work because I was there. But you're absolutely right. So many of these organizations, if they're given the right resources, the right ability to govern, and put empowered with, I would say, where leaders are empowered to take decisions, they can actually do tremendous things. And I've witnessed that upfront and upfront with the experience I had there, because I think one of the things that maybe worked at the time is because I had come in from industry and I could actually understand how the underlying telco networks and things work. So people in industry, from the telcos, from internet service providers, et cetera, they were like, "Oh, great! There's this guy who actually understands the technology piece of it and will try and interpret." But due credit also, and equal credit needs to be given to the administrators and the leadership at TRAI to sort of have an open mind and to sort of listen to some new ideas. And it was the listening to those new ideas that came out with, all the series of policies that TRAI and recommendation papers and consultations that they did during that time that they were able to come out with, right? So my first big project there was to really, lead and write India's first internet broadband policy as a whole policy in terms of with all its different aspects and all the different things that we need to think about. And you would not expect that a typical, the typical view of government agencies to say that they're not forward-looking, that they're not open to these new ideas. So you wouldn't expect them to try and undertake such a massive, project and say, okay, we're going to go out and in 2003, 2004, sort of say, can we come up with a direction paper and a set of policies and recommendations to various departments of the government to say, this is what we need to do to grow internet broadband, when more than half the country at that time, particularly the bureaucrats and leadership, were saying, why do we even need the internet? So it's quite a delight if you find sort of the right pockets and the right people, you can actually pull that lever and have tremendous impact on what happens down in the future. Another big project that TRAI did in 2004 to 2005, which again, I was lucky to be, co-leading with some of the people there, is the whole direction to take the prices of leased line circuits. So if you recall, the early days of the internet, all the traffic in India used to have to be carried to London or to New York to get exchanged over there before it came back. And unfortunately, all of the call centers, BPOs, IT-enabled service providers that were, mushrooming up in Gurgaon and Noida and Bangalore and all the rest of the places, they would have to carry all their traffic overseas and pay for it, because that's where all the peering and exchanges were actually happening. And TRAI decided to undertake a policy to review the tariffs on these international lease circuits and domestic lease circuits, because traffic had grown exponentially in the 10 years leading up to that, but because it was still very largely a monopoly, BSNL had been acquired by Tata, and the only other real player in that space was BSNL, a little bit, and Airtel, which had just established its first international link. They said, you've not brought prices down in so many years, but traffic has gone up. And so we came out with a tariff order, which brought down the highest capacity of pricing on that bandwidth down by 74%. And obviously the telecom operator sued, and we went to TDSAT and won. We went to the High Court and won, and eventually it went to the Supreme Court. And once we won the case in the Supreme Court, literally the very next day, lease line pricing dropped by 74%. And the single biggest input cost to BPOs and internet-enabled companies at that time, which was just bandwidth cost, dropped overnight. So it takes, real gutsy leadership to be able to go out and do that. It takes real foresight, and I give full credit to the TRAI leadership at that time, who were able to really stand behind that. And despite having tremendous amounts of corporate pressure, press pressure, and all the rest of that stuff, say this is the right thing to do. And in hindsight, it was kind of obvious, right? Hindsight is really 2020. And so, of course, that was the right thing to do, right? No one would have argued against it, including the telcos who were opposing it at that point in time, because now they've made so much more money than they were ever making at that point in time. And so you see that in regulators, I think, across the board. When they're empowered and enabled and you put the right people there, they can do amazing things.
I mean, globally, it's been seen that, usually whenever there's some form of a regulatory capture, it's always the incumbents who seem to be, winning. But I think, interestingly, in India, we've seen really it opening up. I mean, like fintech revolution, the whole telecom revolution has been insane, and obviously we are doing some things right. And, I think... it's really been, it's glad it kind of worked out. But, tell me, I mean, do you find that, as the government state, do you see the leadership kind of, really working independently? Do you see biases coming in? I mean, just your POV, I mean, just to kind of get a sense.
Yeah, look, I mean, I try and not get too much into the politics of it, because you will go through ebbs and waves, right? There will be changes in priorities. There will be changes in leaders. There will be changes in ministers and political parties, all the rest of that stuff. I think one needs to focus on the long term, maybe like the stock market, right? You put your SIP in the regulatory environment. You kind of say, you know what? Just play the long game and keep investing in it over time, meaning do your bit, which is keeping up with what's happening. If you're in an industry that's regulated, contribute your opinions, your point of views. There will be many setbacks. There will be many disappointments. Things will happen that you may or may not be happy with. And there's been many shocks to the system as well. I'm not saying everything is always the best, right? But that's the case for any country. There's no country in the world that has a perfect regulatory system. We always seem to measure ourselves against more mature markets like the US or Europe or things like that. They have highly imperfect systems as well. And there have been many, many instances where they have also been under regulatory capture by incumbents. But it all goes in ebbs and waves. And if you kind of stick to it, I think over a period of time, like you've said, in so many areas like telecom and fintech, we are leading the world in innovation. And yes, one can still take a step back and point to 100 things that are wrong with both telecom and fintech, but on balance, there's so many more things which are right, which have gotten us to where we are today. And hopefully, as people continue to improve, will take us to the direction we're heading into in the future.
Kunal, just help me understand the overall cost structure. I mean, I would imagine in telecom, largely a lot of it would be about the capital deployment that happens, right? And and of course, I'm sure the people cost is probably a big thing, but I would imagine largely it's really the networks, the whole the underlying pipes that's going in and the equipments, right? Why is there such a difference in the cost, parity when you look at the Indian versus the European and the US? I mean, is it perception pricing? Is it PPP pricing, or is there a real cost plus pricing? What's really going on there?
Well, look, there's a number of things that playing into that, right? First is just sheer volume. We have just that much more volume in that much less space, right? So I don't know if the numbers are going to be exactly accurate, but just for illustration purposes, if you compare us to the US, we have more than 3x the number of people and about a third of the landmass. So when you think about from a mobile network perspective, you're getting that many more users for that same mobile tower. You're getting that much more traffic for that same mobile tower. And And from a pure just coverage perspective, you need less of them to cover the entire landmass, right? And yes, we have our rural areas as well, and we have areas which are, unaffordable, and that's why we have a universal services obligation fund to support that, as do places like the US, Australia, Europe, et cetera, et cetera. But, I mean, you go to Australia, right? They have the population of Mumbai and a landmass X times the size of India. So for them, serving their rural areas is really almost impossible. And there's places in the US where the only real way to get broadband connectivity is through space connectivity, and that's why the likes of SpaceX are doing so well over there. But we don't have you know the similar challenges at such a scale, right? We have challenges in the mountains, we have challenges in the deserts and really, really far to reach places. But as a percentage of population, as a percentage of land mass, those areas are very small. So overall, our overall cost to serve, because of that scale, gets amortized over a much denser population, much higher user base. The other thing is everything here is on mobile vis-a-vis fixed line, right? And I think Geo has repeated this statistic many times over, but they carry more traffic on their mobile network than all US mobile networks combined.
Wow.
So again, the benefit of scale sort of kicks in. Then the other piece is the input cost. Because of this scale, we do have the lowest base station and active equipment pricing in the world. So when we buy things from Nokia and Ericsson and Cisco and the rest of them, we do get cost advantages because of the volumes that we're able to buy as a country. We've increasingly got more and more manufacturing happening locally, which also helps in bringing some of those costs down. But the other big thing is their labor input cost is low. Right. Yeah. And that is, a sheer flow straight through to the bottom line on the CapEx perspective, because, there you have very high costs of labor, you have very high cost of truck rolls, of manpower, of unions, and all the rest of that stuff. And I think, while we have much lower cost of labor, but because of the reach that the telecom industry has now had, it's created so many jobs, and it's allowed so many engineers to find entry-level positions and be deployed all over the country. So it's had tremendous benefit to getting employability and engineers up and running, yet still being able to keep those costs much lower than the rest of the world.
Right. Maybe my last question, really about telecom is, how do you see the space evolving? I mean, if you were to now go back and look at the crystal ball that you did 20 years back, right. What can we expect over the next 5 years? I mean,
Sure. So, if we think about the Gs as in generations of connectivity, right? 2G was basically all about texting, right? I mean, that's when we first started getting emails on our phones, right? And you could, for all those BlackBerry Messenger users who still remember how to do all that stuff, right? And then 3G came along, and 3G was about web browsing, right? And, and your chats got fancier, you had emoticons and all the rest of that stuff, but it was about the ability to web browse. And 4G has really been about the transformation from browsing to streaming, and the ability to consume video content. And, and the number of people today that are following cricket matches and, and miniseries and news and all the rest of that stuff on their mobile is far outflanking and outshadowing the amount of, people that are watching in traditional media. And 5G has been launched, and we haven't seen the use case exactly emerge yet. But I think what 5G is really going to be about is, sort of the hyper-connected world from the perspective of it's going to go from two-dimensional streaming to really about immersive experiences, and also about, hyper-connectivity through AI and using AI as a, almost as pervasive throughout the network layer. And so, like I said, the exact use cases and applications haven't really emerged yet. It was much easier for, the use case of 3G of web browsing to emerge because globally it was already happening through wired connectivity, and 3G was already prevalent in the rest of the world. Again, when 4G came along, the concept of video streaming was already happening. But 4G, what it enabled was, local content to be created, local streamers to become influencers and celebrities and stars, and local channels to start to emerge, right? Now with 5G, we're still at that stage where even the global use case for 5G is still being proven out. You have the IoT and you have sort of the enterprise applications which are happening. But by and large, even around the rest of the world, 5G is still sort of being seen as faster 4G. that entire AI or immersive reality or virtual reality use case has not really emerged, and that's still being built up because the devices and the apps ecosystem is starting to catch up. But when that happens, given that we have the privilege of being much closer in 5G deployment generations to the rest of the world, I think India is going to be one of the massive drivers of that, right? I remember in my consulting days, people sort of saying that, why do we need video calling, right? And this is prior to 4G launch. And everyone's like, people talk on the phone because they want to hear each other's voice. Why do you want to invade someone's privacy by doing a video call, right? They may be in their bathroom, they may be in their bed, right? Whatever it is. And now you see today, I mean, it's video calls are, all pervasive, right? Families are speaking to each other. I mean, our family stays in touch through that in such a regular basis because we're all over the world. And that's really the best way to communicate. And it has become the default communication setting, not only for personal, but professional, particularly after COVID as well. And so today, people may be sitting back and say, okay, 5G is faster 4G. What's really going to be the use case? And why will people want to do virtual or augmented reality? And I think as we move in that direction, if you think about particularly the challenges that we face in India around scaling up education, scaling up services and utilities, government outreach, governance, and all the rest of the stuff, including health and medicine, all that makes the use cases for 5G as that makes those use cases available to the lowest common denominator 5G if implemented properly, and I think that will really help to drive 5G in this country.
Great, and I think this stepping away, like I said, from telecom, the startup scene in India. In fact, you remarked that how we've gone from being nowhere to probably be the second biggest, startup destination in that. How have you seen the maturity and the whole space evolve, over the last 20 years? You've been involved with the startups, I think, way back, and then you were, I think, on the board of, like I said, in 2009 onwards with 197. So, your perspective on that.
Absolutely. And it's very, I feel privileged also to have been involved in the early days of the startup ecosystem because, when we were doing consulting, so in my consulting startup, BDA, which later was acquired by Analysis Mason, we actually got to work with a lot of global investors who were, private equity and venture capital funds investing into India for the first time. So many of the banner startups that are out there today that are well-known households, we had a chance to look at them at the first round because they're also now 10, 15 years old, right? I mean, so it was very interesting to see how, like you said, the types of ideas that were coming to market in the early days were very much just about copying what was happening elsewhere in the world and bringing that to India. And I think while we still do that in many instances, but the maturity of the startup ecosystem is really measured by the fact that so many of the ideas that are coming to market today and are growing and getting funded and getting a lot of traction are actually first-time India ideas. And I think that is very encouraging because those are Indian-born ideas for Indian, with Indian solutions made in India for India. And some of them actually do well enough here that those ideas then start getting taken to other parts of the world, right? And I think that's what really defines some of the maturity in the startup ecosystem that we're now seeing. Yes, along the way, one will have your challenges. You will have bad actors. You will have that. But even the US has it. Even Europe has it. Even Southeast Asia has it. You're not going to be able to get away from that and have a perfect world. But really, I think it's driven by the fact that innovation and the depth of talent that's being created is creating those ideas here, and now those ideas are being exported. You mentioned Healthify Me as one of the organizations. So I had the privilege of being involved with Healthify Me since like day -1, basically, since before the idea was born. And now, if you see their roadmap, and a lot has been written about it recently, is as they've evolved over the years, and they've built themselves into an AI-first, AI-led health and wellness platform. Now they are looking to take all they've learned in India and the success and experience and expertise that they built here, and now take that to more developed markets, particularly US and Europe, right? And it's amazing because that will be a digital services export that was found and created and built in India as a coaching-led online virtual model, which is now going to be proven and hopefully successful in a market as large and as competitive as the US.
Yeah, I mean, we are really living in some amazing times from the India story perspective, right? Yes. And how was it working with VSS? I mean, you spent 5 years on the board, and
yeah, absolutely. So look, I the so you know a lot of people are not necessarily aware of how Paytm became Paytm, right? Because it started off as 197 and a mobile VAS
Vast
company, right? And we
company.
had a lot
That's
of
right.
we had a lot of mobile VAS companies,
Yeah.
and at the time, and really the mobile internet was born out of mobile VAS companies, right? So the guys who did astrology SMS services and
Yeah.
ringtones and all the rest of that stuff,
Mm.
that's where the idea of applications actually was born. And so I, got a seat in the front row to sort of be to witness that and to really watch Vijay as he was able to turn the entire company and transform it from being purely a VAS player to actually being a mobile internet company, and then to really test various ideas and then sort of crack upon the idea of Paytm as a wallet and as a fintech player and say, you know what, your mobile is your wallet, and really be the first to come up with that idea and scale it. And so, like I said, I think with every experience I've had, there's been amazing learning opportunities, and to sort of see how the board, the rest of the board, his investors at that time were able to support the journey of really a massive pivot, right? Because already when they were going from being 197 to Paytm, it was already, I think, Series C, Series D type of funding. And it was also very interesting because, what led the opportunity to do that innovation was a decision between, whether to sort of, whether to IPO in that 2010, 2011 timeframe, or to stay private and continue to raise private capital and innovate. And sort of the path of staying private allowed that innovation to sort of continue and allowed Paytm as we know it
Right.
today to really be born. And then, that partnership with Uber, which was for the first big thing that really drove usage and adoption, was what really kickstarted that entire revolution.
Right.
So, Vijay is an amazing entrepreneur with a great vision at that time of innovation. Everything that they did at 197 as a vast company was, they're always quite forward looking to finally building Paytm. Every entrepreneur goes through many challenges, and I think that's what those scars are what define you. And certainly 197 is going through some challenging, Paytm is going through some challenging times right now. But they've built an amazing legacy.
I'm sure he'll come out of it. I mean, he's quite
Yeah,
a fighter, and I think
absolutely.
to your point, 197 when they raised like truckloads of money for the VAS business, and all of us startups who were in the payments business were just not able to raise money at that time because the VC couldn't, the world couldn't believe that the mobiles are going to be used for payments, something as serious as payments, and
Right.
we used to joke that we've kind of arrived at a gunfight with sticks in our hand because suddenly this guy had raised, I believe, 120 crores for the VAS business, and then he directed all towards payments, right? And I think in that shows his, resilience and, really the far side to kind of change the game because Hangama, Moj, all these VAS companies had kind of, I think by that time, were on the really dipping, and he kind of reinvented. So, and I'm
Yes.
sure he'll do that again right now. And,
Yep.
any closing thoughts, Kunal, about entrepreneurs getting into this space right now, whether it's telecom or being a startup, and especially with this huge thing of AI that's looming over everybody. I mean, if you were, let's say, a grad student coming out, getting to the workforce, or an entrepreneur looking, what would you do differently with this whole AI, what should I say, backdrop?
I mean, a couple of different questions. That one is, I truly believe in the long game, right? I think too many people, especially young people coming out into the workforce today, and I see this even in our ecosystem, in our company, people want to jump jobs sort of very regularly. 18 months, 24 months is almost considered like a lifetime in some companies. And I think that's, while that's helpful for you to get increments very, very rapidly, but it's definitely not, I don't think, helpful to build a really long-term career where you can create wealth. You may create, remuneration, escalation in the short term, but if you're thinking about generational wealth and long-term wealth, one needs to really be associated with something, a cause, something that you're passionate about, something that you believe in for a much longer period of time. The other thing is because, like you said, of the plethora of opportunities that are available today, and again, with a lot of the entrepreneurs that I get the opportunity to partner with, mentor, coach, and things like that, I think it's really about identifying what do you truly believe in, and are you willing to are you willing to stick with that core fundamental belief for the next, at least 5 or 6 years? Pivots will happen, right? We've pivoted so many times as well in our own organization. But can you truly define that one thread, which will be something that you are willing to stand by, despite, things getting really tough, despite customers disappearing, consolidation happening, regulation changing, et cetera, et cetera. And say that, what, fundamentally, we believe that the industry and the world has to sort of move in that direction. If you find that, then one needs to really stick with it for the long term. And just in terms of what's happening with AI, it's an amazing time, right? I mean, it's like, for me, it reminds me of, like, when the internet was effectively born and started growing, right? The first dot-com boom. Possibilities today are endless. I think some of us, on the older side, and I don't shy away from calling myself now on the older side of the spectrum, we're going to have to reinvent ourselves as well, right? We're going to have to learn how to figure out and adopt and take advantage of all the tools that are being made available so that we can continue to be, sharper, better, apply a lot of the knowledge, and say, I dare to say maybe wisdom that we've developed over the years. And it's for, the younger generation of, like you said, graduate students, entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs, to really figure out how do you continue to push the edge on that. Because unlike where India and the startup ecosystem was, say, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, where we were followers and we were taking technology and adopting technology that the rest of the world was building, today in AI, yes, we may be taking or adopting LLMs from other parts of the world. But when it comes to applications and opportunities to build on top of that, I think we're, we have the opportunity to lead, and we've got some amazing, people in the ecosystem here today, entrepreneurs who are really, trying to be at the forefront and building from the front, on top of those opportunities that are really, emerging in the whole world together, in terms of where we are.
And I think before you go, I'm sure as a leader, somebody who started off his career in consulting, which could probably be a high pressure job and everything, how have you really managed stress, anxiety, and pressures, over the last 20 years, any tips or takeaways for the people who are listening in, and what really works for you?
Look, so I was not always, I'm still not good at it, frankly speaking. If you ask many of my friends and my colleagues, and including the leadership team, they certainly tell me to sleep more. But I will say one thing which is very important is to, one has to prioritize fitness and family. It cannot only be the job at all points in time. About 11 years ago or so, no, sorry, more than that now, about, like 12 or 13 years ago, I was about 25 kilos heavier than I am today. Completely out of shape, completely in, a negative path of decline. And had at that point in time, various things not caused me to sort of just change my outlook on health and wellness, I'd probably be in a terrible, much, much worse off shape than I am today. Healthify Me is certainly part of one of the things that helped me to think through that, because it coincided with the time when I started to prioritize health and wellness. And but that, like anything else, is a long-term journey as well, right? And you just kind of have to do that. And like I said, it's family and fitness together are what are going to stick with you for the rest of your life. Companies, ventures, while I say, stick with them for the long term, but at the end of the day, those will come and go as well. And I would say these are the only two things that are there with you, hopefully, for life. So some amount of prioritization is beyond. And frankly speaking, the days, or if I'm doing this for several days at a time, if I don't get a chance to work out, I really don't have the mental acuity, the energy, positive vibes on those days. Then if I, even if I'm tired a little bit and you go for a 3K run or something in the morning and then come to office, it's like a night and day difference.
Right. Lovely. So I think health, fitness, family, and not quitting your job every 18 months. I hope my Thinkly team is listening in, the young ones at least out there. But Kunal, I really enjoyed. This was a wonderful session. I personally learned a lot more, and I'm sure the people in the community have a lot of takeaways from this. Look forward to having you, on the talk sometime again. And
thank you so much, Vivek.
Yeah.
This was a pleasure for me as well. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a good evening. Yeah.
All Thanks, right. You too. Bye-bye.